most of Crimea can be held at risk. I think airfields, I think logistics nodes, Kerch Bridge might be part of that, headquarters, but also in southern and eastern Ukraine. So it allows the Ukrainians to target every square centimetre of their territory which is being occupied by the Russians, which was not the case before now. These ATACMS have a much longer range than the previous version that they were given last October. This version has a range out to about 300 kilometres. We're not quite sure which variants they were given, but it's probably a mix of the unitary warhead, which is one big warhead, and the cluster munition, which is lots and lots of sub-munitions. What this will permit the Ukrainians to do is target Russian operational targets. And when I say operational targets, these are targets that aren't engaged in direct combat now and aren't, back in Russia. They're somewhere in between. It's headquarters, it's logistics nodes, it's reserve troop locations. And the aim is to ensure if the Ukrainians do have to engage in ground combat, they're doing it in a much leveler playing field than what they're doing now, that they're able to kill as many Russians and destroy as much as their artillery before they're actually able to engage in ground combat, which is very similar to the air-land battle concept that NATO used in the Cold War.
So are we talking about potential targets deep inside Crimea, perhaps the Kerch Bridge as well?
Well, certainly most of Crimea can be held at risk. I think airfields, I think logistics nodes, Kerch Bridge might be part of that, headquarters, but also in southern and eastern Ukraine. So it allows the Ukrainians to target every square centimetre of their territory which is being occupied by the Russians, which was not the case before now. It's also worth noting that the ATACMS has some fairly clever trickery involved, which allows it to degrade the ability of Russian air defences to intercept them. So that's another reason why these things are very important in the Ukrainian armoury at the moment.
Right now, the Russians will know there's a small window before Ukraine reaps the benefits of this military aid arriving. What options will it be weighing up?
Well, it'll be weighing up, how much can it throw at the Ukrainians right now? I mean, it hasn't gone through another mobilisation process. We're expecting that they will, but they're still able to recruit 25 to 30,000. Generally replaces their losses and a little bit more. So they will be getting as many forces in combat as they can right now, while the Ukrainians are at what the Russians think, while the Ukrainians are at their weakest. We should recall, we thought the Ukrainians weren't going to hold out very long in 2022 and they achieved amazing things. So, we shouldn't be writing them off. But the Russians are doing things like moving first line parachute divisions, VDV units from the south to the east at the moment, which is an indication that the east will be their market, and it's where the Russians think they have the greatest chance of making some kind of significant breakthrough.
Mick, you also described this constant drumbeat of the escalation of terror by the West in this war. Their fear that sending some of the weapons that Ukraine needs at the time it crucially needs those weapons is in some way going to escalate in a way that we are fearful of. Has that attitude changed?
I'm not sure that it has. I think our risk tolerance might have increased a bit. I think the recent comments by French President Macron have been very interesting, and I really like that version of President Macron we're seeing at the moment, because he's probably the first Western leader that's kind of forced Putin to think, oh, wow, someone's talking about NATO boots on the ground. They haven't done that before. But all the way through this war, we've seen this escalation terror. It's like, oh, we can't give them artillery, then we give them artillery. Oh, we can't give them tanks, then we give them tanks. I mean, we're going to do it. Let's just do it, and do it in a way that's speedy and allows this stuff to have an impact rather than kind of being a lagging capability. I think a really important indicator of how fearful some governments are of escalation at the moment is the most recent US statements that China has crossed a red line on the amount of dual-use technologies it's providing to Russia in this war, and that it has to stop it. So I think, we'll see out of the Biden administration, is it willing to put its money where its mouth is with China crossing those red lines, or is it going to take the Obama administration approach, lays out red lines, and when the adversary crosses them, it just looks the other way?
What kind of action would you like the Biden administration to take if China does continue to cross those red lines in supporting Russia?
Well, I think there's more it can do on the technology front. You got to wonder how many other American companies might be dissuaded from dealing with, although a lot of them at the moment are leaving of their own volition because of some of the laws that China brought in the last few years. So, the Americans are probably going to have to be pretty creative in this because, as we've seen, sanctions against Russia have hurt them a bit, but they haven't had the full impact that we'd hoped they would. I think, too, that, the US will be looking at those who export other high technologies to China and might be twisting some arms there. But at the end of the day, it'll be up to the Biden administration to decide whether it wants to act on Chinese across these red lines.
And then, of course, whatever comes afterwards, after November. Finally, something that's very pertinent to you, the potential expansion of the AUKUS military partnership of Australia, the UK and US to include South Korea as a Pillar 2 partner. As I understand it, that would not mean it's not involved in the provision of conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines, but more the development of things like hypersonic missiles, underwater drones, cyber technology. This, of course, is deplored by President Xi. What effect do you think this potential expansion will have in the region, and why is it expanding?
I think it'd be a great move. And of course, the Chinese would hate it because they want to deal with each country individually. They don't want to deal with alliances because they know together we're much stronger than them. We saw recent speculation that Japan might join the elements of AUKUS. I think that would be a fabulous move. They have an enormously sophisticated, broad and deep research and development capacity that outstrips Australia, certainly, potentially Britain as well. They would bring an enormous amount to AUKUS Pillar 2. And let's not forget, they've been a very responsible international citizen for many, many decades since the end of the Second World War. I think Korea are in the same boat. They're a responsible international citizen. Both Australia and the US in particular have very close and significant trading relationships with Korea. I think for Australia, it's our second or third largest trading partner. And once again, they have a very sophisticated R&D capacity, and they design and build their own submarines, warships, aircraft, armoured vehicles. So I think they bring a lot to it. It gets down to the security around that sharing of technology. But politically, I think it makes all the sense in the world.
I said, and finally, but I just have one last question. To what extent do you think what is happening in Ukraine right now and how the next 12, 24 months roll out will impact the security and what happens and the attitudes to your part of the world?
I think it has a few impacts. First and foremost, you're seeing Ukraine as a huge battle lab for new technologies that are going to spin off all over. One example is we saw Iran use exactly the same kind of tactics against Israel a couple of weeks ago that Russia's been using with its drone and missile attacks against Ukraine. That's just one example. I think you'll see other examples when it comes to information warfare, the use of drones and things like that. Now, Ukraine and the Indo-Pacific, very different terrain, weather, geography and politics. But I think there are enough lessons there about leadership, about strategic decision-making, about industrial bases that they will translate into the Indo-Pacific very well.